I think it's so important to just be willing to say, I know this is the right move for me. It might be a mistake, and that's okay.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Tales from the Journey. I'm Stephanie Zamora, and today I'm here with Jim Woods, who is a coach and a writer and author of 2 best-selling books. Jim, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Yeah, I would love if you could take a moment to just share a little bit more about you and what it is that you do.
Sure. I'm primarily a writer, which means working with other clients and freelance, or just partnering with other writers and helping them as an editor or a coach, maybe even just for support, kind of for accountability. And I worked with so many different authors and writers, and even making courses. And I feel like I'm part of the creative community. And I love just kind of partnering with that, with that mindset.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm really, really excited for you to be here and share your story today because I know you shared with me that you were an accountant for about 15 years and then went through your own dark night of the soul. So I would love if you could paint a picture for us of who you were before and what life was like before and what happened.
Yeah. I grew up in Ohio, and I currently live in Ohio, near Akron, Ohio. And I went to school, the University of Akron, and I got an accounting degree. Well, my dad was an accountant, and I think, like, subconsciously, I just thought, ooh, well, my dad does this, I'll go do that. Because
Yeah.
our parents are such a big influence on, what we do, how we think. And I always wanted to go work for the FBI, but that never panned out. Like, literally right before I graduated college, I'm dating myself here, 9/11 happened
Yeah.
and everything changed. And my only plan was to go work for the FBI. That was it. Because I was like 21 at the time, 22. I was like, yeah, I'll go do that. That sounds good. And I had no backup plan. So I just worked with my dad for a few years in the local little city here. And then when I was 25, I moved to Nashville, which was a big jump because culturally it's like Nashville is so
Yeah.
different than, small town Ohio. It's like all of a sudden there's this big town and traffic and music and excitement. And um, it was just such a culture shock. So that was kind of where I was. And I was working for the city of Nashville as an accountant in the finance department. And I never realized I was like discontent because it was the norm.
Yeah.
But literally about 2011, I realized I was bored. And at that point, it had been about, I started there in late '05. So it'd been like 6-ish years roughly. And then I worked in accounting all through college as well and after college. So I was about 13 years in with accounting, and I
Yeah.
just got bored. And I realized, I remember this conversation like almost verbatim, like it happened yesterday. It was like a Wednesday morning, and I was chatting with a coworker, just having coffee, shooting the breeze. It was something we would do like before work, before, things kind of picked up. And it was early in his office, and I was like, "Hey, what's that on your wall?" And he's like, "Oh, that's my number." And I'm like, "What do you mean your number?" He's like, "Yeah, it's 342 days until I retire." And I was like, "Okay." I think the number was even higher. I think it was more like 542. The number doesn't matter. But the point is, he was just checking off the days, like, until he could leave. And that was like a big inciting incident for me because I realized it was like, you can do this until you retire. And I was 30 at the time, and I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to do just this. I'm not going to do this till I retire. And it was so common, especially in government, where it's like, this is what you do. This is the path that is laid for
Yeah.
you. And I was just like, whoa, pump the brakes, hold up here. And that was kind of one of those hinge moments. And from that point on, I was like, okay, something's got to change, and I'm not sure what.
Yeah.
So that's kind of background right there for, that big moment.
Yeah. Talk to us. I would actually love to know before we talk about kind of your dark night of the soul moment. Did you have any relationship to writing during this time?
Not then. Not at all. If you'd asked me if I was a writer, I would have been like, no, no. Um, I blogged before, like maybe 08, 09, but I stopped. It was just for fun. I mean, it was like I was more into guitar. I was more in, more like guitar, I thought was my hobby. I thought that was kind of my passion, which in Nashville, it was a great distraction for me because every single person down there like plays guitar. And I really made that one of my, like my focus. I was just like, oh, and my coworker, my little office where I was, he was buying guitars and selling them like all the time. And I was kind of like, ooh, this is kind of fun. Let's just do that. And that was my creative release, if you will. And I
Yeah.
would play at home and stuff, but nothing with writing like seriously. Maybe a few blog posts here and there. I found um, this guitar video. I mean, I was so not really into writing. I was just kind of like dabbling
Yeah.
sporadically. That's the way I would put it.
Okay.
But nothing consistent. And it was just, whenever wherever the wind took me on that, I was like, okay, oh, I'm gonna stop for a year and a half or 2 years. And
Yeah. Well, I love what you shared about your story in terms of being in a field and working at a job and having this career path and having those moments of, is this all there is? Like, is this really what life is going to look like? And I can relate to that so much. I went through my quarter life crisis when I was like 21, where I had that same thing of like,
21. Oh
is
my.
this it? Is this all there is? Is this really what
Yeah.
I worked so hard to create for myself? So, talk to us a little bit about how it grew from there and how it led to that nervous breakdown moment, as you called it.
It really, that was the moment of discomfort. Okay. Well, time wise here, I was feeling pressure from so many places. I
Yeah.
had a new daughter. My daughter was like 1 at the time, and our house was underwater, not physically, but
Okay.
as far as the as far as the economy, and we
Yeah.
owed more on it than it was worth. And I was just like, I can't quit this job. I need this certain amount of money just for us to live. Was this That was the story I just kept spinning in my head. I can't quit. My wife was home with my daughter who was like
Yeah.
1 year old, and I really, really feel like that scene from Indiana Jones with the Temple of Doom, where they're like in this room where there's spikes come down and the walls keep getting closer.
Yeah.
I remember that point distinctively. I was like in the bathroom, just sitting there, avoiding being in the office because I was like, anywhere but my cubicle, anywhere but my office. And
Yeah.
I was just trying to avoid it. I was like, I think I was playing a video game on my phone or something, and I was just like, I can't go back. This is terrible. And I just remembered that image in the movie, and I haven't seen that movie in years, but it was like, oh my gosh, this is so eerie. It's so
Yeah.
similar. And at that point, my body just started rebelling against me. I believe it was first like just random aches and pains. And I can't remember what it was exactly first. I think it was like, okay, my arm hurts. Like, did I twist it? Was I carrying my daughter funny? Were we playing?
Yeah.
Did I lug too many guitars around? What was it? I had no answer. And then I felt like this pain in my side. And I was like, this is weird. And it was literally every morning I was waking up with more pains. And I'm like, something ain't right. This is really, really weird. And I went to the doctor, and my blood pressure was like through the roof. And I was just
Yeah.
freaking out. And this whole time I was like, well, I'll apply for other jobs. That's going to be the answer. I'll apply for all these other jobs. And I was like, there was an opening with I believe it was like the Department of Treasury. And it was like in Cincinnati for like bank fraud. And I was like, oh yeah, yeah, I want this. I want this. This will be good. And I was like, oh yeah, that'll be it. And then I never heard nothing. And I spent all
Yeah.
this time, like applying for that. And I was like, well, maybe if I just moved to another, job, even within the city of Nashville, nothing. I couldn't find anything. And it was like everything was just kind of compounding worse and worse. And it was really a nightmare. It wasn't though until I started having heart palpitations where my
Yeah.
heart, like I thought I was having a heart attack. I'm 30. I'm like, whoa, what is going on?
Yeah.
And I gave up like caffeine, which is unheard of for a parent. I gave up caffeine and I still was having them. And I had them for months and months. And I went to the doctor, and one person was like, well, here's some blood pressure medicine, whatever. And I'm like, that's not it. That's not it. And I
Mm.
literally like went back the very next day. I was like, this ain't working. I want to talk to
Yeah.
another doctor. And they didn't really have any answers. And I was just like, okay, what do I do? What can I do? And my wife, the whole time, she knew I was, going through every kind of mess. And I was depressed too. I was like feeling more hopeless as all of this stuff was just piling up. And my wife was concerned. She said she thought I was suicidal. I never felt that I was, in wanting to inflict
Yeah.
injury. I just was like internalizing a lot of my frustration. And I didn't go to a counselor. I didn't talk through it with anyone. I just was like stuffing it, just stuffing everything inside, and trying to find those distractions. The hey, we made it to Friday. It's Friday. You get that little boost of momentum. Okay, Saturday, but then like come Sunday, I knew that Monday was coming, and I would just be even more
Yeah.
cranky, and it wasn't good. And I was searching everywhere I could. I was reaching out to people. And it wasn't until I really started meeting with other people for coffee. I found this great little coffee shop and in Nashville. It's a pretty popular spot. It's called Crema. And I would go over there and I would just meet with other people and talk to them, and artists, photographers, writers, just almost, it was kind of like my therapy, frankly. I think that was what it really
Yeah.
was. And the more I started talking to other people, I kind of just, I was finding encouragement. And then I went to this conference in Nashville. I didn't know anyone there. It was called the Quitter Conference with John Acuff. He wrote this book called Quitter, where it was like, leave your day job and go to your
Yeah.
dream job. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I want. And I went to that and I was having freaking heart palpitations the whole time through the thing. And I
Yeah.
was like, this is messed up. I kept trying to distract myself, tap your foot, then you don't feel like you're having a
Right.
heart attack when your heart's pounding. But I remember one part where he's like, his therapist said, well, what did the voices in your head tell you? And that was a big moment where I was like, okay, okay. And they're like, you're too young, you're too old, to pursue a dream. You'll fail, you won't make money. And I was like, I don't even know what my dream is, but it's kind of cool to hear all this. And
Yeah.
I felt a lot of hope just from that one part of this like 3-4 hour conference. I was just like, okay, so I'm gonna figure this out. That was kind of my moment. I was like, okay, I'm gonna figure this out. And if you were to ask me like, are you a writer? What do you like to do? I'd have been like, I I like to play guitar.
Yeah.
I would have been like, but I don't want to just do that. That's kind of just for fun, and I'm not that great at it. It's just something I do. And that conference, going to that in conjunction with meeting with other people and just talking to them, like artists and podcasters and all, like every day I possibly could, I was meeting with people. And now looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, this was incredible because
Yeah.
it's not that easy to meet with people. Like
No.
it's unheard of now in 2020 to meet with people for coffee 3 times a week, in the same spot. And I like, now it's so hard to meet with people, especially now in 2020 with COVID, but even just scheduling Zoom meetings, it could be
Yeah.
hard to, to meet with people on a regular basis. So I I kept learning from everyone else and just kind of realizing, okay, we're kind of all in this same boat together. And most importantly, I've got hope here. I can figure this out was the little story I started to spin in my mind. I can figure this out. I'm on the right path. If
Yeah.
I just keep working on it, I can figure this out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. And I think you touch on something so important, which is having other people that understand where we're at and what we're going through. I would love to know, because for me personally, it was really challenging to find my community. And I've had different
Mm.
iterations of community as I've grown. But in those early years, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I couldn't find people to really deeply connect with. And a lot of that was my own growth that I needed to do. But I'd love to hear, who were these people? Where did you find them? And what were your conversations about?
In Nashville, there are so many writers. And so often it was like we were all not far, like location wise. There, like Franklin, Tennessee, there are so many different bloggers and entrepreneurs. And also, this entrepreneur center went in like right by my office. I didn't think anything of it. I found it like after the fact, but it was like I was in the exact perfect
Yeah.
place at the right time. I met a lot of creative folks through church. We were going to a church anyway, and I just started to like talk to other people there. I mostly writers. I remember one conversation I had with like Jeff Goins. He's a writer in Franklin, Tennessee, and he went to my church. And I remember I was like really in that am I a writer phase, because I'm like, okay, I'm trying to figure this out. I don't know what it is I want to do, but I'll give this a shot. I'll experiment. And I said, I think I might be a writer. I just kind of threw that out there.
Yeah.
And this conversation too is burned in my mind because he's like, well, Stephen Pressfield says you're a writer whenever you say you are. And I was like, ooh, okay. And I'd read Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art. It's a pretty popular book for creatives where it's like
Yeah.
this thing is out there stopping us from creating called resistance. And that really stuck in my head. It's like, okay, so if I say I'm a writer, and especially if I show up and I'm writing, okay, I'm a writer. I can wave the I'm a writer flag and kind of push aside this image in my mind of you have to look a certain way. You have to have a cabin in the woods, and you have to have a typewriter and a pipe and a sweater,
Yeah.
because all these silly ideas in my head were floating around. Like, I'm not a writer. This doesn't make sense. And that was kind of an extra little kick in the pants for me, where I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep talking to as many people as possible. So many were also connected with Jeff or went to my church or were loosely connected to John Acuff, who had
Yeah.
that quitter conference. It was like, once you find one connecting point, don't try to go invent a bunch of other connecting points. I mean, you're not gonna meet the perfect person to connect
Right.
with. And don't put the pressure on yourself. And I have to admit, I'm even telling myself this today. Like, I was super excited and thrilled to talk to you, but I'm not putting the pressure, okay, I'm going to talk to Stephanie and we're going to click and we're going to become best friends. You
Yeah.
can't go in putting extra pressure on yourself. You just have to let a conversation go. And I've become more and more honest, and like just not too honest in the oversharing, like scare people off kind of way. But I've just kind of pulled down more of the curtain, because like all my creativity comes from my own life and my own experiences. And I
Yeah.
like what I'm going through is what I'm going to write about. Like, I like prefer to be that transparent, and some people can't do that, but like people want you, they don't want a censored, filtered version of you. And I think that's where like just even the conversation is like, hey, how's it going? Oh, well, I'm working on a website. It's so hard working on a website. Have you worked on a website? Like, yeah, I have. Have you tried this? It just,
Yeah.
it it's eye-opening when you admit you're struggling with something. And that's, I think I wasn't opening with that. Like, that's not like the, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. I'm struggling with my website. No, no, no. That's coming up like 15 minutes after talking. You're not just, hey, I'm having problems with SEO. Can you help me? That's like those LinkedIn requests that we get, right? It's
Right.
like, okay, buy this from me now. I just met you.
Yeah.
No, it was the natural, conversation. And what, you want to try to make it even, try to make it very reciprocal and interactive, not a one-way street kind of thing. And I think
Yeah.
that's what it was, where it was almost like, it was almost creative entrepreneur school for me, meeting
Yeah.
with so many people there. And if I wasn't meeting with them in person, I would schedule a phone call and chat with them. And like, I was a networking machine the more I realized, but I wasn't doing it in a forced way. It was
Yeah.
more like, how can we both help each other? How can we learn from each other? And I do miss that, Stephanie. That's one thing I like. A lot of my ties are still in Nashville. Well, this is
Yeah.
6 years later. I'm in Akron, Ohio now, and a lot of my ties are still in Nashville, and I'm, still working on it more and more here in Ohio. Um,
Yeah.
what I guess what I'm saying is the journey never really ends, and I have to remember like those lessons I learned back then. Okay, keep doing what you did back then. Don't try to reinvent the wheel and try to do
Yeah.
things that aren't natural for you.
Totally. So how did writing start to plant its seed in your way of being in the world? Like you mentioned in one of your conversations, you said, I think I might be a writer. Where did that come from?
Just the idea of looking back at what I did in the past, what I really enjoyed. And I also found this file on my computer. Again, it was just an experiment, just something that came on a whim, but I wrote this children's book, and it didn't even take me long at all. I was like, okay, hey, this will be fun. Just jot this down, and like totally on a whim. And I remembered too, back even in school, where like when I first heard Edgar Allan Poe and read some of his stuff, and I was like, whoa, this is really good. This is so different from everything else. And I just kind of connected the dots by looking in the rear view mirror, as opposed to, making lots of assumptions that, I can only go do this, I can only do that, I have a degree in
Yeah.
accounting, i'm I've got to do this. And it was like taking a bunch of dots and then just connecting them, or even a puzzle. Like I had a few pieces. I was like, okay, Edgar Allan Poe, that's a piece. I wrote this story when I was like in fourth grade, and other people seemed to really like it, and it was ranked for some national award. It wasn't even like a winner, but it was like in the top 10. And I was like, okay, let's put that other piece on the puzzle board
Yeah.
here. And all those conversations I had with everyone else, even if they're a photographer or a painter, it didn't really matter. It all kind of felt like stories to me. Or even just a podcaster, I would have been like, okay, this is a story. Okay, more pieces for the puzzle. And yes, I'd blogged before, but I didn't take it seriously. I thought, well, okay, what if I just try this seriously? What then?
Yeah.
And I think it was eventually you start to see something come to the surface if you put enough pieces down and keep playing with those pieces and turning them. And my number one love is story. It's not just writing, but
Yeah.
I know I can tell more stories as a writer, because it's like I'm not, it's a pretty simple format, as opposed to, painting or whatever. But I feel like it's all stories. And I think that I realized that's my number one love. And I think I kept reading enough things too, and not just blogs, but books. I think it was the reading and learning process. I was like, ooh, I can help others this way. And it can be a quicker process versus, hey, I'm going to become a photographer. Hey, I'm going to
Yeah.
try this. I think it was just, I was like, okay, all I need, I have the tools now. And I even remember too, like when I was younger, before I ever moved away to Nashville, I would write lyrics and poetry on paper, like really late at night. And I would just dump all this out on a page, and I'd written some songs and stuff. And I never called myself creative. And I never said, hey, I'm an artist, or hey, I'm creative. But that was another big puzzle piece. That was probably a corner. I put that down and I said,
Yeah.
okay, all right, if I add all this up, I think I'm a writer. Let's pursue that.
I love that so much. It sounds so similar to my journey. Writing is like breathing for me now. I have to write. If I'm not writing, something has gone wrong and everyone should be worried. But I never would have considered myself a writer when I was younger, even though I can look back and say I wrote a ton of poetry. I wrote essays before we had blogs. I blogged back when blogging was so community driven. Do you remember that? It was amazing. Like writing has always been a part of my life, but it's funny how we can't see it because we grow up and we become somebody and we start to fit ourselves into the world in the way that we think we should. We lose sight of who we really are. And when we can look back, we can start to thread that storyline for our purpose, and how our purpose gets expressed throughout our life changes depending on what we're going through and who we are. But I love that you share being able to look back and see all those pieces were there the whole time. What I also really love about your story is I think it's really important for people who are struggling with depression to hear. I know I struggled with depression quite a bit in my 20s. It feels so hard to be a person in the world. Like it takes everything that you have to get through the day. And if you're depressed because you're not feeling fulfilled and you're not feeling like yourself, it's even harder to get through the day because you're doing all these things you don't want to be doing anymore. But when we can find those little things that start to breathe life back into us, we can start to get our footing again. And it sounds like meeting with other creatives and starting to embrace and entertain this idea that I think I might be a writer. It started to kind of lift you back up. Was there anything else during that time that really
I think it did lift me back up, but also taking a personality test was this form of validation because I really fit myself in the accountant mold. And if you do something over time, it just becomes the norm. If you're depressed and unhappy or unfulfilled, and you've been that way all along, that's the norm. And I took a Myers-Briggs test, and I'm not saying that's the be all and end all, but it was important for me because I really thought, okay, you're this beekeeper. And I kind of always knew. I was like, well, that's not really me, but I'm really good at pretending. I'm really good. I can convince myself for quite a while, but that's not me. That's more a role I'm playing. And it said I was this INFP, which is like the artist, essentially. I was like, what? Wait, this is weird. What? And I was blown away by that. And I was like, I remember reading it and I was just crying. I was like, this explains a lot if you're more wired for something completely unrelated. At least that's how I thought. I was like, okay, I'm a square peg, round hole kind of thing. In reality, I don't view it as much as that, as much as like, well, you weren't using all those gifts. You weren't intentionally creating. You were analyzing. I wasn't telling stories. I was examining stories. And I think that's something we all kind of can get caught up in. It's like, it's kind of close, but not the right fit. And examining the stories, like I loved the one part of my job where I would dig into the invoices for the police department. And I was like, okay, this is scratching some of that itch. Like the investigator in me, the artist in me was like, ooh, you can piece together a story here. Ooh, look, they got all these busts over here at this location. And I love that one part. That was like my favorite part of the job. It's like, ooh, all these petty cash things. Ooh, are there any crooked cops? I'm going to look at their money and see where they're spending it. And it's like, you can see hints of it there, but like, it's not, but then you throw in a lot of things I'm not engaged with, or then it piles up and then you stuff those feelings down. But when you embrace your true self, like your real natural tendencies, it can change things a lot. It can change your perspective. And just talking to people, encouraging people, uplifting people. I wasn't talking to many Debbie Downers. And this is not an introvert extrovert thing. It's not even like, it's okay to complain, but I'm talking like, are you doing something about it? Or are you just going to rant? it's okay to, yes, I mean, we're all human. It's okay to complain and rant, but okay, then what's next? Do you do more of that? Is it like the potato chip thing where you just can't have just one, you got to keep doing it? Or do you say, okay, that's what happened. Here's what I do next. And I think that's
Yeah.
where I think that's what really jump started me.
Yeah. That's so important. One of the things we talk about in the journey mapping process is this idea of reorienting. And so, as we start to become more of who we're here to be in the aftermath of everything we're going through, there's this process of reorienting not only to ourselves, but to our work and our relationships and our life. I would love to hear what that was like for you and how it ultimately led you into writing as a career.
When you say reorienting, I I feel like that goes back to my brain goes back to the puzzle. It's like, okay, hey,
Mhm.
remember all these things? And for me, it was being willing to talk about these things
Yeah.
versus stuffing them. Mention, like, I don't talk about it a ton, but I talk about it pretty regularly that I struggle with depression. It's like, look, you can do something about it because I think a lot more people struggle with this, which can actually be a uniting thing, and we can kind of bond together against it
Yeah.
and make the most of it, or we can kind of put it in the back room and try to ignore it, but it doesn't work. And I think it was just embracing my love for story was the big hinge moment for me too, where it's like, okay, hey, you love stories, you do love to investigate, let's pull together these things you really like. And I'm also, like I said, I'm a pretty open book. Like, any advice I ever give in my coaching or anything, it's like, look, I've tried this, I'm not saying it'll work perfect for you, but why not try it? Give it a shot. Um, I'm always up for experimentation on things, because I think being stuck is so challenging, and especially if you're not trying anything new, what do you think you're going to
Yeah.
get? You're going to be stuck. And just putting yourself out there, I have to laugh because my first blog that I took seriously was unknown gym, like unknowngym.com. And it was like, I had no freaking clue what I was doing. I was like, I'm trying to figure this out myself, and just documenting the process. I changed that about a year and a half later to Jim Woods Writes. I was like, okay, Jim Woods Writes, that I can attach to that. I'm a writer. This is me. This is my thing. But it's also important not to like take what you're doing as your identity. Like,
Yeah.
I could quit writing. I'm not gonna be happy about it. I might not do it professionally, but you can change things. You can mix things up a bit. I mean, I can see a lot of similarities between just writing and podcasting, or writing and YouTube, because I really look at more as that umbrella of story. We all love stories. We're storytelling machines, really. I think that's really where my heart is. That's where the target is in my mind, on story. And it takes guts to say, wow, I could go do something else versus
Yeah.
this is my thing and this is all I do. I think that puts so much pressure on it. And after I had started taking writing really seriously, I put out an ebook, and I partnered up with a friend with that. I didn't like do it just on my own. I wrote the majority of it, but a friend helped me like kind of fill in the gaps. And it wasn't so much a equal 50-50 thing, but having that collaboration, having that group effort, and having that partnership, really, that's what helped push me past the finish line. And then selling that book, that in addition, the economy got better. That's how I ended up like breaking even on my house. And I was like, hey, we could move. We're not going to lose big money if we move. And it was like all these doors started creaking open, and just being open to those possibilities. Like, okay, I didn't make a lot, but what if, what if 1,500 bucks I made from writing on this ebook, what if what if I didn't even have to make that much? What if we were just better with our money? What if we moved to a cheaper area? Hello,
Mm.
we moved back to Ohio. I mean, that
Yeah.
was a big part for us where in my own personal journey, it was like just saying, okay, what if? What if we try some of these other things? And at the end, really, where I kindly finally hit that road of like, I gotta leave. I can't take anymore. I gotta put in my 2 weeks. That was a really scary time. I wasn't sure. I
Yeah.
didn't know the next steps. I just, I came to the point where it was like, I can't do this anymore. I like, I just knew in my heart it was the right move. And we moved back to Ohio in August of 2014. And that was like, okay, done with one adventure, on to another, and I literally landed my first freelance client like 2 days after I put in my resignation.
Yeah.
And I didn't plan all this out. I wish I could take credit and be like, yeah, I planned it. No, no. I was like, well, I had no words for it. I was like, all right.
Yeah.
And I think it applies really good with with your journey map. It's like, okay, you're on a journey and there are going to be some really, really scary moments. And you can, you can do nothing or you can do something. I think
Yeah.
those are the real two options. I mean, yeah, um you can obviously take wrong turns, but being willing to make wrong turns and saying, you know what, I have some faith that I can course correct, that I'll make some mistakes. I mean, for me, the mistake of staying put in the, quote unquote safe job would have been worse than
Yeah.
failing as a writer. I think that, one of my friends told me, like, after I quit, after I put in my 2 weeks, like, this is our farewell dinner. He's like, well, he's like, at bare minimum, he's like, look, you'll be able to tell your kids that you took that leap of faith, that you didn't
Yeah.
stay put. And I was like, okay, say so. I don't know. I have no clue what I'm doing. But he was absolutely right. And I think it's so important to just be willing to say, I know this is the right move for me. It might be a mistake, and that's okay.
Yeah. We talk a lot about choice points and journey mapping too, and that is such a huge one, to take a leap of faith like that. And there's such a deep level of self-trust that you have to have, first of all, to know, like, yes, I've been sick at different points of this job. Like, I've been sick of it at different points and ready to quit. But how do I know this is the moment that I have to do it? Like,
Yeah.
it takes such a deep level of self-trust. And I don't know if there's anything else, especially being a coach yourself, that you can share about that process, but also there's like a level of reorganization that happens within us when we take a leap of faith like that. Like, it's not just, oh, I hope it works out. It's like we realize the enormity and the immensity of our decision and how much it's going to impact. And then I know for me, it always shifts like how I show up in the world. So I would love if you could speak a little bit more about that for your own experience.
Sure. I think it took a while for the dust to settle, figuratively and literally, on this with the move and everything. Not being alone was huge. My wife was united. She knew the path I'd went through, or the
Yeah.
journey I'd been on. And when it was all said and done, like I told you, it was 2011 where I was a total mess and like literally thought I was having heart attacks. It wasn't until June or until August of 2014 where I moved. And I learned so much during that time. That's where my empathy grew. That's where I can tap into it pretty instantaneously. Like, you're desperate, you're feeling stressed, you're, falling apart. Guess what? I've been there too. And now it's like I can use that even as a gift because I get it. And I kind of put my characters through it even when I'm writing stories. It's like, look,
Yeah.
this is that dark night of the soul, really challenging part of the journey. When I made that move, it was awkward. It was weird. Everything was new, but yet it was also a little familiar because I moved back home where I grew up. Readjusting, it just takes time. And it's like the more you show up, the more you keep doing something, the more familiar something becomes. Just be honest with yourself would be my like coaching. I'm putting my coaching hat on. Be honest with yourself. Feel what you're feeling, and don't go alone. I think those are the big three things. Like being honest with yourself. Like my honesty level and self-awareness. I
Yeah.
sometimes laugh when I'm talking to my coach. I'm like, yeah, I know the problems, but even if I know most of it, even if I know 80% of it or 90, there's still that 10. There's still
Yeah.
that 20 because we're a little bit biased and we might not see that thing that's behind us. If we're looking out in front, we might not see what's behind our ear. We might not see what's behind our neck, but we can see what's right in front of our nose or our eyes. But that it's going to take some time. It's good to get that extra perspective. And that's one thing, Stephanie, where your services can absolutely help. And like, I feel like everybody needs a coach, and especially like
Yeah.
be aware of the coaches who don't have a coach. That's one thing I
Yes.
will say, because that's almost like saying, hey, look at me, I've got all the answers. I would never trust a coach who doesn't have a coach.
No. I love that. Talk to us about, so you got your first freelance client, which I love. And I feel like
Yeah.
sometimes, not always, I don't want to say that when we take a leap of faith that everything always falls into place. Sometimes we need to struggle a bit more in order to become who we need to be to do the thing we're setting out to do. But oftentimes I find for myself and with friends and clients that when we take that leap of faith, we've realigned energetically with something else. And so all these other possibilities and opportunities open up. So you got your first freelance client, which is awesome. What happened from there? Did it grow quickly and organically? Did it take time?
It took some time, but it it was a good slow process for me. Thankfully, it wasn't like, okay, now I need X number. It wasn't as frantic, and it was a really good fit. It was the perfect fit for me because it was actually writing about some of this job stuff, which I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing fit. Hello, yeah, okay. And not just that, but it was for rehab clinics. Well, this rehab clinic, it like has 100 websites and they need content. And it was like, while it was one client, they needed a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was able to actually work with a friend that indirectly, just by putting myself out there and being helpful and connecting others, I ended up getting him that job. Well, he hired me later. Okay. And guess what? His boss, I knew her too. And I still talk to her like every day now because our journeys are like almost overlapping now. And it's funny because just putting it out there, like you said, I think it's things just kind of align. And now you're looking back, you're like, what? Putting a book out there was a huge key for me to open some
Yeah.
doors. And that's one thing that's one thing I will say. I think almost everybody should write like one book. Why not? Because so many people say I have a book in me, but then they never do.
Yeah.
The putting the book out there, that's what landed me another client. And I've never been the guy that has a lot of clients. I just like how I am wired. It really, I'm a loyal guy. I love long-term relationships. I don't want to have a bunch of small clients that are one-off here and there. I love to have one client on retainer. You can manage your expectations. You can do some of your
Yeah.
own work. That's my ideal situation. And I worked with that client for like 3.5, almost 4 years, which is unheard of for freelance now. And it's funny because like even right now I'm in a time of transition where I'm like, okay, who am I going to work with? Because things change with COVID. You just have to keep working and keep doing what you can and
Yeah.
ask the question. I've been thinking about this one a lot, Stephanie. It's like, are you better than you were yesterday? That's my gauge. Like, are you better than you were yesterday? don't compete with all these other people and all these, like, I can't remotely compare my coaching to yours, Stephanie. I can't at all, because it's so unfair. It's like
Right.
we have different strengths, different weaknesses, different personalities. There's like a million differences if you really want to pick at it there. But if we compete with ourselves and only
Yeah.
ourselves, it's like, oh, okay, I can say, okay, I'm definitely better. I put up a video, or I tried a podcast, or I did the blog post, I did this email, I did all of these things. You can really start to see, okay, this is some progress. I can't argue with the data. I can argue with emotions for sure, but like, you can't argue with the data.
Right. What would you say your relationship is to faith?
I think it's really important. Beliefs are like right there. I've done the Strengths
Mm.
Finder, and I think beliefs are like, you know, go with what you believe. Play to your strengths is something I often say. I think my relationship with faith is really important. I'm a Christian. My some of my thoughts, I guess, have evolved a little as I've grown as a person, but faith and trust, I mean, that's right there with loyalty, and that's right there with relationships. And I think, like, sometimes it can even work against you. I'll be honest. Like, I had this conversation with a friend the other day, and I said, well, if you're wanting something really strong and loyal and showing up and like being committed, that's a different mindset than many people who are like, hey, I need this, check the box. And
Yeah.
I think that's where, for me as a writer, it's like, I don't want to work with people who kind of treat me like, hey, check the box, I need someone to come cut my grass, check the box, like, it's like, if I'm pouring my heart and soul into it, I'm going all in. And that's kind of how I always am. Like, I want to go all in. I don't want to be, hey, this is just whatever. I'm
Yeah.
like, I want to pour everything I can into it and do my very best, versus, hey, just show up, do it, check the box. I'm like, I've done enough of that checking the box in my, during my time as an accountant. I really want to pursue bigger, better things where, help some people, encourage some people, give some hope, tell good stories, versus the just show up and, hey, I made X dollars today. I feel like our lives are too short to, I'm not in it for the money. It's not about the money. It's about the stories and the relationships, and helping and serving others.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like you talked about this a little bit with all of the creatives that you met with, and then John Acuff, who I love. He's amazing and
Yeah,
hilarious. Um, but we talk also about the role of mentors a lot in journey mapping and how essential that they are. Were there any other mentors you've had along the way?
there've been so many, and it's funny. Like I told you, I'm really wired. Like, I want people to be in my life, like, long term committed. But mentors often come and go,
Oh, yeah.
and I've had so many. And sometimes it's like, a mentor could be an author who passed away. JD Salinger, love his stuff, big fan, but he's passed away for a while, and he was very antisocial. He wouldn't have been your mentor no matter what. um, you can really soak up and learn from anyone, anywhere, with all the resources that are available. I've had amazing experiences just meeting with a person one time, and then like a couple emails, and that was it. And I was shocked, because this one person, I was on the fence. Jim Woods writes, I don't know, unknown Jim. I was busy overthinking it. I was like teetering on the fence, and he's like, you need to do some digging. He's like, he didn't, and a good mentor is not going to tell you what to do. They're going to be like,
Right.
they'll paint the picture like around the frames, but they're not going to paint the picture itself. And I was frustrated. I couldn't meet up with him again. He kind of kept blowing me off. And I was like, then I thought, you know what? Take it for what it is. That person was my
Yeah.
mentor for that specific season. And then, I don't even know. I was like, okay, I thought he wanted to see what happened next. Um, be willing to just be willing to learn. and to grow
Yeah.
from that and move on. But yeah, it's even the clients I've worked with. I actually worked with John, which was kind of a funny dynamic. We became friends and I worked with him for a while and I learned a ton and I grew. And then he didn't need me anymore. And I was like, okay, well, that was a great season where I could learn
Yeah.
and move on, because it takes some maturity where it's like you can almost become a little codependent if you're like, oh, but I need you, I need you.
Right.
No, you that's take the good, learn from the bad if there is some bad in the mix, and just move on. And
Yeah.
I think that is one thing I've even struggled with today. It's like, well, how are you framing that one? That person who kind of blew you off after you learned so much and grew so much from it. I think that's where it's like, okay, where have I matured? Where have I, gone to my past habits or whatever? It's like, well, what story are you telling yourself? It's not
Yeah.
this person left me or abandoned me. It's like, no, this person helped me move from A to B. And mentors are huge. I feel like it's I've never asked for a mentor. I just learned so much from a person for a while, for a season, and then
Yeah.
I moved on. And yeah, you can find so many mentors if you really just soak it up and look at everything as an opportunity.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that you refer to it as seasons. I do that as well.
Oh, it's
um,
so important.
because everything's temporary and everything always changes and transitions.
Yeah.
What is one thing, if you could go back and talk to Jim, who was deciding to go into finance, what's one thing that you wish you could have told yourself before all
Oh,
this began?
don't limit yourself. Don't stop yourself. Don't make big assumptions. Um, don't wait for validation. I think that was the big one for me. It's like once you get some validation, then we feel like this extra, like we've been knighted. It's like, okay, move on. Now you're official. Don't wait for that because it might not come. And I never really, I never really got it. I had to go get it. I remember an interview once with a client, and I was interviewing for a job, and I didn't even get the job, but I was okay with it. But I remember a few times that, like in the conversation after I already pursued being a writer, he's like, "You're a really great writer. You're a really great writer." And I was like, "What? Wait, hold the phone. What? What?" Like you're probably not going to get any approval or validation, like until you're really in it for the long haul. And even if it doesn't come, it's kind of an opinion thing. So don't
Yeah.
don't don't search for validation from others. Just kind of, follow your heart and go get it.
Yeah, I love that. So important. We're going to put all of your amazing information in the show notes, but please tell us about your books and what it is that you do and where people can find you.
Oh, thank you. I primarily write on medium.com. I'm all over that. I write as well for Jim Woods Writes. That's my site, jimwoodswrites.com. I've written 3 books, one of which is actually part of a course. First one is Ready, Aim, Fire. It's all about goals, getting goals step by step. And that's so much of my coaching is really in there. I also written the book Focus Booster because I feel like that's a real struggle, amplifying our focus and really just narrowing things down. And it's kind of in that productivity realm, which is, it's just so important. I feel like productivity is one of those things that can affect so many parts of our lives. I also just love working with other writers and giving them good feedback, editing, and, helping them get past their demons, because I think we all have so much baggage and issues and, things that'll stop us from sharing stories and writing. That's one of my favorite things too, because I don't do it a ton. I'm pretty selective. It's like, okay, we have to be a good fit for each other, and really just find each other encouraging, and just working with a writer to, put out their first book, or maybe someone who's like, I'm not a writer, but I've always wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
That's, working with that person and making an outline and making that story in their mind come into the world is another thing I love to help with. But people ask me sometimes, they're like, well, what's your goals? What do you want to do? What does the future hold? And I'm like, work with good people and tell good stories. I mean, that is kind of my two-step filter. It's like, I just want to work with other people that, you enjoy being with, where it's like this, even though this work is hard, we're having fun, in the midst of this hard work. And, stories definitely have some challenging parts in there.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for being here, for your presence and your energy and all your wisdom. I so appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephanie. It was such a pleasure. And I have to say the same to you with your charming smile and your personality. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today and for being a part of this powerful community of purpose-driven individuals. We have a ton of free resources for you at www.talesfromthejourney.tv/free, including access to an 8-week sampler of our renowned journey mapping program. That gives you instant access to impactful training lessons, life-changing exercises, and our signature AccuSesh processes that you can implement immediately. We'd love your help in getting the message out and growing our community, so please take a moment to share this episode, subscribe to the podcast, and leave us a review on iTunes. I'll catch you in the next episode.